Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Detective Burrow had said many unsettling things during his years dealing with the Newman family, but those 5 words, those sharp, cold, unforgiving 5 words, landed so brutally that Sharon felt the world fall out from beneath her feet, and in that instant, everything she had fought so hard to protect became threatened by a force far darker and far more personal than anything she expected, and as the truth began to unravel in front of her, she found herself spiraling into a storm of guilt, fear and desperation that would push her to the point where she literally dropped to her knees in front of Burrow, begging him to reconsider what he was about to do, begging him to wait, begging him to give her any chance, even the smallest one, to change the fate he was moments away from locking into motion. Because Sharon had always carried her share of trauma, mistakes, and messy history, but this time the stakes were far higher, and the possible consequences far more devastating, especially because Detective Burrow's 5 words, "We have your son's confession," cut deeper than any threat, any accusation, any warning he could have possibly thrown at her, and as soon as he said them, as soon as those syllables dropped between them like a stone that shattered the air, Sharon's lungs froze, her skin blanched, and her mind raced back to every troubling moment she had recently noticed in Noah, every sign she had ignored, every late-night phone call, every moment he seemed distant or unreachable, and she wondered, had she missed the truth right in front of her eyes, had Noah been hiding something all along, something far more dangerous than she ever allowed herself to imagine, because Burrow didn't stop at those 5 words. No, he continued elaborating, explaining that Noah had walked into the station voluntarily, looking defeated, looking drained, looking like someone who had reached the end of a rope he had been quietly holding onto for far too long, and Burrow claimed that Noah had admitted to being involved in something catastrophic, something connected to Matt's disappearance, something connected to the hidden basement victims the GCPD had been secretly investigating, something that could tie the Newman family into another nightmare scandal, and Sharon, trembling, insisted Noah would never confess to something he didn't do unless he was misled, manipulated, or coerced, because he was vulnerable, emotional, still recovering from heartbreak and struggling with the pressure of being a Newman while still wanting to live his own life, and she begged Burrow to tell her exactly what Noah had said, but Burrow refused to let her anywhere near the official statement, claiming the situation was active, sensitive, and too dangerous to let anything leak before the department was ready, which only made Sharon more frantic, more desperate, because she knew how many times the GCPD had mishandled Newman-related cases, how often they had targeted the wrong person, how easily they misinterpreted evidence or jumped to conclusions to make headlines, and Sharon grabbed Burrow's sleeve, her voice breaking, insisting that Noah would never harm anyone, never get involved in criminal schemes, never willingly confess unless someone pushed him to it, possibly Matt, possibly an accomplice, possibly even someone trying to drag the Newmans back into chaos for revenge, and she demanded to see Noah immediately, but Burrow blocked her, explaining that the confession was being processed, that Noah was under protective observation, and that no family member was allowed to speak to him until the detectives completed their interviews, and Sharon's heart sank because she knew exactly what that meant. They were isolating him, possibly feeding him narratives, possibly turning his own memories against him, and as she felt panic take hold, she remembered the numerous times life had beaten her down. How often she had been cornered by police, how often she had been wrongly accused, how often she had fought through fire just to survive. And she felt that same suffocating pressure building again, but this time her son was in the crosshairs, and that was something she couldn't endure, something she couldn't accept, something she would tear the world apart to prevent. And when Burrow added that they had physical evidence tying Noah to the basement victims, including fingerprints, digital messages, and an object found at the scene that allegedly belonged to him, Sharon's mind nearly collapsed under the weight of that revelation, because she couldn't fathom how Noah could be involved unless he had been set up, unless someone deliberately planted evidence, unless someone planned this entire operation to target her family, and suddenly the memory of Detective Burrow's earlier interactions came flashing back, the strange warnings, the subtle pressure, the cryptic hints that something was brewing under the surface of Genoa City. And Sharon realized Burrow might have known this was coming long before he brought her into the loop, which made her furious, terrified, and determined all at once, and she demanded answers, demanded transparency, demanded to see every piece of evidence they thought they had. But Burrow maintained his cold, official stance, giving her nothing, offering her no clarity except those devastating 5 words that kept echoing in her skull. "We have your son's confession." And at that moment Sharon felt her legs weaken, her chest tighten, and her voice fail entirely because she knew there was only one option left. She had to swallow every ounce of pride she had ever carried, drop every defensive wall she had ever built, and fall to her knees in front of Burrow, begging him, literally begging him, to give her more time before they processed the charges, pleading with him to reconsider, pleading with him to let her speak to Noah, pleading with him to understand that her son was vulnerable, emotional, and easily manipulated, pleading with him to understand that there was no universe where Noah intentionally harmed anyone. And as her knees hit the floor, the sound echoed across the station's hallway like some tragic bell signaling the beginning of a storm, and Burrow, startled, shifted uncomfortably because he wasn't expecting Sharon Newman, strong, resilient, battle-hardened Sharon, to break down like this, and she clutched his wrist, her tears falling freely, insisting that if they rushed through this case without allowing the truth to surface, they would ruin not just an innocent young man but the lives of everyone connected to him. And she cried that she had already lost so much in her life: Ray, Cassie, relationships, trust, stability. And she couldn't lose her son too, not like this, not to some twisted, manipulated confession that likely wasn't even real. And she begged Burrow to acknowledge the possibility that Noah was covering for someone, potentially Matt, potentially an accomplice, potentially someone threatening him or someone he cared about. And she reminded Burrow that the Newman family had enemies who would go to extreme lengths to take them down. And the fact that Noah had been drawn into something this big didn't just feel coincidental. It felt orchestrated, deliberate, part of a much larger scheme, and Burrow, though still maintaining his rigid detective posture, showed a flicker of uncertainty, a brief moment of hesitation, revealing that this case wasn't as airtight as he wanted it to seem. But he still insisted he was following protocol, and Sharon, still kneeling, still crying, still pleading, swore she would uncover the truth herself if she had to. Swore she would not allow her son to become another casualty in Genoa City's long history of corrupted investigations. Swore she would battle every lawyer, every detective, every shadowy force until Noah was cleared. And she begged Burrow to hold off, even for 1 hour, because she knew, she felt it deep in her bones, that something about this confession was wrong. Staged, forced, and she needed time to unravel it. And she asked him to consider the emotional state Noah had been in lately, the odd behavior, the stress, the exhaustion, the feeling that someone had been watching him, following him, manipulating him, and she prayed Burrow would listen, because if he didn't, this would spiral into a nightmare that Genoa City might never recover from. And Sharon, her voice barely above a whisper, told Burrow that if he pushed forward without letting her speak to Noah, without letting her intervene, he would not just destroy a family. He would destroy the fragile trust between the police and the Newmans. And she reminded him of all the time she had cooperated with investigations, offered help, worked with them, despite their past mistakes, and she pleaded for mercy, for empathy, for understanding. And in that moment something inside Burrow shifted. Not enough for him to release Noah, not enough for him to show her the evidence, but enough for him to pause, enough for him to hesitate, enough for him to look into Sharon's eyes and silently acknowledge that this situation was far more complicated than he initially let on. And Sharon, still on her knees, realized she had opened a crack in the wall, a chance, however small, to break through the lies, the manipulation, and the nightmare that had been set into motion. And she took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and vowed, right there, kneeling on the cold station floor, that she would uncover who was truly responsible, that she would expose whoever dragged Noah into this, that she would unravel the mystery of the basement victims, the planted evidence, and the twisted forces attempting to destroy her family. And as Burrow slowly stepped back, torn between duty and conscience, Sharon rose, her grief sharpening into fierce, unbreakable determination, and she walked away with one mission burning inside her. She would save her son, no matter what darkness she had to face, no matter what enemy she had to confront, no matter what truth she had to dig up from the shadows of Genoa City, because Sharon Collins Newman had been broken before, but she had never stayed broken, and this time, fueled by a mother's fear and fury, she would stop at nothing to take down the monster behind Noah's false confession. And with those 5 words still echoing in her mind like a curse she refused to accept, she marched forward into the storm, ready to rewrite the ending the world was trying to force upon her family. As Sharon staggered out of the police station, still shaken from Detective Burrow's devastating 5 words and the unbearable humiliation of kneeling on the station floor begging for mercy that had yet to be granted, She felt as though the very air in Genoa City had thickened into a suffocating fog, the kind that clings to skin and sinks into lungs, the kind that refuses to let you breathe until the truth is exposed. And as she stepped into the cold evening, her mind spiraling with fear for Noah, she replayed every moment of the past week, every subtle sign that something had been wrong, every conversation where Noah seemed distant, withdrawn, lost in a world of shadows she hadn't been able to penetrate, and guilt consumed her, because she knew she should have pushed harder, watched more closely, questioned the silences, the late nights, the strange tension in his eyes. But Sharon had spent so much time trying to remain the pillar everyone believed she was, supporting Nick, dealing with her own trauma, managing the coffee house, and simply trying to keep her life stitched together, that she missed what was right in front of her. Her son drowning in something dark, something dangerous, something far beyond what a mother's intuition could decode without being directly confronted by it. And as she walked to her car, her hands shaking, she realized that Burrow's hesitation, small, fleeting but real, meant something. Meant there was an opening she could exploit, a thread she could pull, a vulnerability within the investigation that she could use to her advantage, and Sharon knew that if she wanted to uncover the truth, she needed to act quickly, before the department locked Noah's fate into a narrative that was nearly impossible to reverse. And so instead of driving home, she turned the key and headed straight to Crimson Lights, not because she needed to work, but because she needed a quiet place to think, a familiar place to breathe. A place that had always grounded her no matter how chaotic her life became, and she slipped inside the darkened coffee house, turning on a single dim lamp near the counter, letting its soft golden glow settle her nerves just enough so she could piece together the fragments of everything she knew, starting with the victims Burrow referenced, victims found in a basement, victims connected to Matt, and the mysterious chain of events that had begun weeks earlier, a chain of events Sharon had watched from the sidelines, aware but not fully understanding the depth of danger lurking beneath the surface, and she thought of Matt's sudden presence in Genoa City, the way he inserted himself into conversations, conflicts, alliances, the way he seemed to always appear in the background of drama involving Nick, Adam, and the rest of the Newmans, the way he had a strange hold over certain people, especially Noah. And Sharon realized with a jolt that Noah's confession, if it was even real, might not be a confession at all but a forced admission crafted by someone who knew how to exploit vulnerabilities, someone who didn't fear consequences, someone who wanted to dismantle the Newman family piece by piece. And as she sat at the small round table near the window, she replayed the moment when Burrow mentioned the piece of evidence that allegedly belonged to Noah, something found at the basement crime scene, and Sharon's instincts flared because she knew her son, knew his habits, knew what he carried, what he didn't carry, what he would never willingly leave behind. And Burrow's refusal to show her the evidence only confirmed her suspicion that it wasn't solid, that it wasn't clear-cut, that it was likely manipulated or planted, and Sharon's mind drifted back to a moment she initially dismissed as trivial. 3 days earlier, Noah had come into Crimson Lights looking pale, distracted, and deeply distressed, and when she asked if he was okay, he replied with a shaky, "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine, just tired," before sitting alone in the corner, staring at his phone like he was reading a message that terrified him. And Sharon remembered how he quickly locked the screen when she approached, how he left abruptly without finishing his drink, and at the time she chalked it up to heartbreak or stress, but now she realized that moment was a clue, a signal that someone had already begun sinking their claws into him, and the guilt of missing it tore at her chest, because she should have pushed harder, should have demanded answers, should have refused to walk away, and now Noah was paying the price for her restraint. And as Sharon's tears welled again, she forced herself to breathe, steadying her body as she recognized that self-blame wouldn't help Noah, only action would, and she needed information, allies, and a plan, starting with one person who always knew more than he pretended. Nick, because Nick had been entangled with Matt, had fought him, questioned him, and had even hinted recently that something didn't feel right, that Matt wasn't who he claimed to be, and Sharon pulled out her phone, debating whether to call him or show up in person. But she knew Nick well enough to understand that some conversations needed face-to-face gravity, so she grabbed her keys and left the coffee house, determined to confront him immediately. And as she drove to the Newman ranch, her mind raced with the unspoken possibility that if Noah's confession was tied to Matt, then Matt wasn't just a manipulator. He was dangerous, possibly violent, possibly connected to a deeper network of criminal activity that ran beneath Genoa City like a venomous current no one had yet traced. And when Sharon reached the ranch, the lights were still on, signaling that Victor or Nick or both were awake, because Newmans never slept when trouble shadowed the family. And as she stepped out of the car and hurried to the door, she braced herself for the explosive storm that always erupted when the family was under attack. And the moment Nick opened the door, his expression already tense, she felt the dam inside her break, and she told him everything. Burrow's 5 words, the alleged confession, the evidence, the refusal to let her see Noah. And the moment she dropped to her knees in desperation, and Nick's face hardened into something fierce and protective, something that always emerged when his loved ones were threatened, and he muttered that he knew something was wrong with Matt from the moment he resurfaced, that he had felt a chill every time the man stepped into a room, that he had sensed a hidden agenda brewing beneath Matt's carefully constructed charm. And Sharon told him she believed Noah's confession wasn't real, that Noah was covering for someone, or worse, being forced into taking the fall, and Nick agreed, saying Noah would never willingly involve himself in anything that could endanger innocent lives, especially not something as horrific as basement victims. And Sharon's voice trembled as she revealed her fear that Noah had been manipulated emotionally, psychologically, or even physically threatened, and Nick, furious, immediately called Victor. Because when it came to protecting the family from external threats, especially coordinated ones, there was no force in Genoa City more formidable than Victor Newman, and within minutes Victor appeared, his expression carved from stone, his eyes burning with cold fury. And Sharon, though often intimidated by Victor's intensity, felt a strange sense of relief, because she knew that when Victor set his sights on uncovering a threat, he did not stop until every piece of the puzzle was exposed, every enemy cornered, and every danger neutralized. And Victor demanded details, sharp and direct, and Sharon explained everything again, and Victor's jaw tightened when he heard about the confession, immediately insisting that the police must have been compromised or misled, because Noah was not weak-minded, not easily manipulated unless someone truly dangerous was pulling the strings. And Victor declared that no one, not detectives, not criminals, not hidden enemies, would destroy his grandson's life. And he vowed to personally intervene, calling Michael Baldwin at once, ordering him to drop everything and meet him at the ranch for an emergency legal review, because Victor sensed something far larger at play, something that had been brewing for months, something involving Matt, the victims, the basement, and possibly even corrupt insiders working within the authorities. And while Nick and Victor prepared to launch a counterattack, Sharon quietly stepped aside, pacing near the fireplace as her thoughts drifted back to Noah, alone in a police interrogation room, scared, vulnerable, and possibly believing this nightmare was his burden alone. And her heart ached as she remembered how gentle Noah had always been, how artistic, empathetic, and prone to absorbing the pain of those around him, how he feared disappointing the people he loved, how he often internalized blame even when he wasn't responsible for anything. And she realized with horror that someone could have easily exploited those traits, bending him into confessing to protect someone else or to shield Sharon or Nick or the entire Newman family, because Noah, despite everything, had always carried the weight of being a Newman with quiet dignity, never embracing the chaos but always trying to fix it, even if it meant sacrificing his own well-being. And Sharon felt another wave of anguish as she imagined Noah sitting there, believing he had no one to rescue him, no one to believe him, no one to fight for him. And she swore that she would be the mother he needed, the warrior she used to be, the version of herself who wouldn't crumble under pressure but instead rose and fought with absolute ferocity. And as she clenched her fists, she realized there was one more person she needed to confront, someone who might know exactly what Matt had been involved in, someone who had hinted more than once that secrets were festering beneath the surface. Chelsea, because Chelsea had recently stumbled upon conversations involving Connor, Matt, and digital traces she didn't fully understand, and Sharon remembered how Chelsea tried to warn her once, only for the moment to be interrupted, and Sharon now understood that Chelsea might have been closing in on something crucial, something directly tied to Noah's predicament, and she turned back to Nick and Victor, telling them she needed to speak to Chelsea immediately, and Nick offered to go with her, but Sharon insisted she needed to do this herself because Chelsea might open up more freely without Newman circling her. And Sharon left the ranch, heart-pounding, determination solidifying into armor, because this wasn't just about clearing Noah's name. It was about tearing apart every lie, every manipulation, every dark secret that had been weaponized against her son. And as she drove toward Chelsea's apartment, Sharon vowed that by the end of this night, she would have answers, allies, and a clear path to exposing the real culprit, because she refused to let Noah be destroyed by forces lurking in the shadows of Genoa City, and she refused to let Detective Burrow's 5 words become the prophecy that defined her family's downfall. Not when she still had fight left in her, not when she still had truth on her side, and not when she was finally ready to wage war against whatever darkness had come for her son.